Two people face the same storm, same rain, same wind, same chaos. One breaks down, the other breaks through. Life didn't change, the mind did. Most people don't suffer because life is hard. They suffer because their mind keeps lying to them, quietly, convincingly, every single day. And if you don't take control of that voice, it will control your life. The first key point is that life itself is neutral, but the mind is not. Imagine standing on a beach during a storm. The wind tears at your clothes, the waves crash against the shore, and the sky is a furious gray. Now two people stand side by side. One panics, imagining they will be swept away. The sand beneath them will vanish and the world will end. The other lifts their face to the wind, feels the raw energy of the storm, and marvels at the sheer power of nature. The storm is the same for both, yet the experience is completely different. That difference lives entirely inside the mind. Life presents situations like facts on a page, neither good nor bad, and it is our mind that scribbles fear, judgment, or hope in the margins. When you miss this, every small challenge becomes a mountain. A forgotten deadline feels like failure. A delayed text feels like rejection. A minor criticism feels like the end of your worth. Life itself has done nothing. It has merely shown you a mirror. The mind takes that mirror and distorts it, stretching shadows where there is light, shrinking possibilities into impossibilities. I once knew a young man, brilliant and talented, who lost opportunity after opportunity. Not because the world denied him, but because his mind whispered constantly, "You are not enough. You will fail. You don't belong." He watched doors close and convinced himself it was fate, never realizing that he had already closed the doors in his own mind. Consider how often we dramatize events before they even occur. The mind is a theater director, and you are its lead actor, rehearsing tragedies that have not happened. A car honks behind you, and suddenly you imagine an accident. An email goes unanswered, and your mind scripts betrayal. A friend cancels plans, and your mind writes abandonment. All these stories, spun from neutral events, can govern your happiness, your focus, your sleep, your confidence. Most of what we call problems are simply shadows our own mind casts, and we chase them as if they were real threats. This is why two people can look at the same day and feel completely different realities. A crowded subway in New York can be chaos for one person, a living hell, filled with irritation and stress. For another, it is a theater of life, people moving together, each carrying their own story, each playing their part. The train itself has not changed. The smell, the noise, the delay are constants. The difference is entirely in perception, entirely in how the mind interprets the raw data of life. And when you realize this, you gain a glimpse of freedom, the freedom to choose your story instead of being trapped by it. Even our bodies are caught in this web of mental interpretation. Think of pain, whether emotional or physical. A minor injury may be excruciating if your mind believes it will never heal, while a serious wound may feel manageable if your mind trusts in recovery. I once met a marathon runner who had torn a ligament but still completed a race. The injury was real, the pain was real, but the mind's narrative allowed him to see the finish line as possible, not impossible. Life's raw facts do not dictate suffering. The mind's commentary does. And it is this commentary that most people mistake for reality. Children demonstrate this naturally. A toddler falls off a bike and cries, but the next moment they are laughing, ready to climb back on. Life has struck the same blow for every child who falls, yet the response is different because the mind has not yet learned to exaggerate, to label, to spiral. Somewhere along the way, we adopt stories about what falling means: failure, shame, incompetence. We forget that a stumble is a neutral event. A neutral event becomes unbearable only when the mind adds judgment, memory, and fear, layering consequence upon consequence until it becomes a cage. And yet, there is power in this understanding. When you see life as neutral, when you witness the mind Decorating ordinary events with drama and despair, you begin to reclaim choice. You notice the mental commentary without immediately believing it. You see the difference between what happened and what you told yourself happened. You begin to realize that a storm outside does not have to be a storm within. The young man who felt he would fail can start to try again. Not because life has changed, but because his mind can finally stop magnifying shadows. Life is a simple canvas. It is the mind that paints fear or possibility, limitation or freedom, chaos or calm. The second key point is that the mind is a tool, not a master. Think of it as a radio that constantly broadcasts signals, some clear, some distorted, some pure noise. Most people treat every signal as gospel. Every thought that pops into their head is a commandment. Every feeling a decree, every passing fear a prophecy. But the mind is not a king. It is a servant, a craftsman, a painter. It generates ideas, images, and judgments without pause, and most of the time, it doesn't know what is truly helpful. I knew a woman who convinced herself that she was destined to fail at every new job. The work was fine, the colleagues supportive, the deadlines manageable, but her mind had a running commentary of doom, and she obeyed it as if it were reality. Every decision, every hesitation, every moment of self-doubt was dictated not by life, but by her mind pretending to be her master. Consider how often the mind mixes truth with assumption. A friend cancels dinner plans, and suddenly you are convinced they are abandoning you. A boss frowns in a meeting, and suddenly you are unworthy, incompetent, failing at life. These reactions feel automatic, as if the mind is reporting facts. But in reality, the mind is only providing a narrative. It is a storyteller, not a referee. I once watched a young artist almost give up her painting career because she believed no one would appreciate her work. In truth, her first gallery opening had more visitors than she imagined. Her mind had turned a few uncertain faces into a judgment of universal rejection. And she suffered not because life had rejected her, but because she treated the mind's imagination as the final verdict. The mind can be trained to serve rather than dominate, but most people never notice the patterns it runs. It is like a puppy that chews on everything it sees. You either guide it, teach it, and give it discipline, or you let it destroy the furniture of your inner world. A man I once knew carried anger toward his brother for 20 years over a trivial dispute in childhood. The event itself had long faded, but the mind chewed on it daily, sharpening resentment into something permanent. The mind had become a jailer, not a companion. When he began to consciously observe his thoughts and question them, is this still true? Does this help me? He discovered a freedom that had been invisible while he obeyed every thought blindly. Some of the most dangerous lies the mind tells are disguised as patterns of protection. Don't try, you might fail. Don't trust, you might get hurt. Don't speak, you might embarrass yourself. The mind pretends to be looking out for you, but it is often just recycling fear from old experiences. I remember a young man, terrified of speaking in meetings, who carried anxiety inherited from his parents' fears, internalized as his own. Every presentation became a battlefield, not because the world was harsh, but because his mind rehearsed defeat long before he opened his mouth. It took months of noticing and redirecting his thoughts before he realized that his mind was generating problems, not solving them. The tool that should have sharpened his focus had been dulling it all along. The mind also multiplies small mistakes into catastrophic narratives. A child forgets to water a plant and believes they are a failure. A student misses one question and feels doomed academically. A spouse forgets an anniversary and imagines the relationship crumbling. These are ordinary human experiences, neutral by themselves, but the mind embellishes, interprets, and inflates them. I once met a writer who believed every rejection letter defined his worth. Each letter became a mountain of proof that he would never succeed. Years later, when he looked back, he realized the letters were neutral. They were opportunities, not judgments. The mind had written a tragedy where only a paragraph of learning existed. There is a subtle beauty in recognizing the mind's limitations. When you see thoughts as tools, you can choose which to follow, which to ignore, and which to reshape. You can take a worry and examine it like a sculptor examining clay, testing whether it is solid enough to build something with. A teacher knew would begin every morning by writing down her anxious thoughts, then literally crossing out those that had no evidence or purpose. Over time, she noticed a shift. The mind still produced noise, but it no longer commanded her attention. The servant became a servant again, producing ideas without ruling her life. The mind is not designed to be still, and it is not meant to be controlled with brute force. It is meant to be understood, guided, and occasionally challenged. Like a compass, it can point true north if calibrated, or spin endlessly if ignored. I once met a man who had lived decades believing he was unlucky, that life itself conspired against him. But when he began to notice his thoughts, to treat them as a tool rather than a tyrant, he found opportunities he had always walked past. The same city streets, the same office, the same life, but seen through a different lens, created possibilities that had been invisible. The mind, once a master, had returned to its rightful place, a servant capable of immense creativity, insight, and freedom, if only he allowed it. The third key point is that fear lives in imagination, not reality. Think of fear as a shadow that your mind casts long before the sun even rises. A man walks into a room and his mind whispers, "They will judge you. You will embarrass yourself. You are not enough." He freezes, heart racing, as though a storm has already arrived. But the room is calm. The people smile. Nothing he imagined has happened. Fear had been rehearsing events in his mind, constructing disasters like a playwright scripting tragedies that don't exist. The danger was never real, it was imagined. Most of the weight we carry, the sleepless nights, the tightening in the chest, comes not from what is happening, but from what we allow the mind to project into a future that hasn't arrived. Fear has a peculiar way of multiplying itself in patterns. One thought triggers another, then another, like dominoes set in motion without your conscious consent. A young woman I once knew avoided every new opportunity because she feared failure, but the failure she feared was entirely hypothetical. She had never faced it, yet her mind had constructed a gallery of worst-case scenarios, people laughing at her ideas, doors closing forever, opportunities lost forever. Each day she rehearsed defeat like a musician practicing a song, but the song was one she had never had to play. Her imagination became a cage, the bars invisible but unyielding, and she believed herself trapped because she had never distinguished between the rehearsal and reality. It is easy to confuse anticipation with truth. The mind is brilliant at predicting catastrophe, yet it rarely includes solutions, resilience, or recovery in its calculations. Imagine a man about to give a presentation, trembling because he visualizes stumbling over words, being ignored, mocked, or dismissed. He has never given this exact presentation, but he is already suffering from it. The real room, when he finally stands, may be entirely different, attentive, supportive, or indifferent. Yet hours of energy, courage, and calm have already been spent on something that existed only in his imagination. Fear is exhausting because it is always ahead of you, like a shadow that moves faster than your own legs. The mind can also turn ordinary possibilities into monstrous projections. Recall a father who imagined losing his child in a crowded market. Every outing became a calculated risk, every moment a potential tragedy. In reality, the child wandered safely, laughing, oblivious to the dangers the father conjured. Fear transforms the mundane into a battlefield, the ordinary into a minefield. Life continues its rhythm, simple and neutral, but the mind exaggerates, inflates, and magnifies possibilities until they seem inevitable. It convinces you that danger exists everywhere, when in truth, it is mostly inside your own head. Fear has a subtle form that masquerades as planning. I am being cautious, the mind says. I am preparing for the worst. But preparation becomes obsession, and caution becomes avoidance. A young man I knew refused to apply for a scholarship because he feared rejection. Months passed, the application deadline ended, and he never knew he had been fully qualified. The mind had told a story of certain failure, yet in reality, nothing had yet occurred. Imagination had stolen the moment. Fear convinces us that thinking ahead is the same as reality, when thinking ahead without awareness is surrendering the present to shadows. One of the most insidious traits of fear is how quietly it seeps into daily life. A small hesitation here, a second thought there, until decisions are filtered through an invisible sieve of worry. A student hesitates to raise their hand in class, imagining ridicule. A young professional avoids a conversation with their boss, imagining confrontation. A friend avoids expressing love, imagining rejection. Every imagined outcome is rehearsed endlessly until it becomes indistinguishable from memory. Yet when the moment finally arrives, it is often far less threatening, far less consequential than the mind's projection. The liberation begins when you start observing fear as a construct of imagination rather than a reflection of reality. Imagine standing on a balcony, watching clouds gather in the distance. The storm looks terrifying, yet the balcony is safe, the building solid, the air still. You recognize the storm as distant and separate, not as a direct threat. The mind's fear is the same. When you notice it, name it, and realize it is rehearsing what has not occurred, you step out of its relentless rehearsal. You reclaim the present, and the imagined future loses its power. The man in the room, the young woman avoiding opportunity, the father at the market, they all begin to breathe again because they realize that reality is happening now. And fear, powerful as it feels, is mostly a story told by a mind that cannot yet distinguish between imagination and truth. The fourth key point is that emotional pain repeats only when the mind replays it. Think of a wound on the skin. Once it heals, the body moves on. Yet the mind has the ability to pick at healed scars, reopening them over and over until the pain feels permanent. I once knew a man who had been betrayed by a close friend in college. The event itself lasted a single afternoon, a conversation turned sharp, a promise broken. But for years afterward, he carried it with him as though it were happening every day. Each new friendship, each new collaboration was filtered through the lens of that old betrayal. The mind pressed replay so often that he forgot the original wound had healed, leaving only the illusion of suffering. Memory is a tricky companion because it is never neutral. It doesn't just record events, it interprets, embellishes, and dramatizes them. A woman I knew remembered a harsh word her father had said when she was 10, as though it were an indictment of her entire life. Every day she whispered that memory to herself, using it as proof of her inadequacy. The event itself had long faded, yet her mind refused to release it. Emotional pain has a way of surviving beyond its cause when we invite the mind to relive it repeatedly. The more we think about it, the more real it becomes, until it begins to feel as tangible as present suffering. People often confuse repetition with learning, believing that revisiting painful moments helps them understand or process life. But there is a difference between reflection and relentless replay. I met a teacher who kept revisiting an embarrassing mistake she made during her first year of teaching, imagining how her students had judged her every single day. She believed she was learning, but in reality, she was reinforcing shame, making herself smaller with each mental rehearsal. Reflection allows insight. Replay only extends the life of pain. The mind has a tendency to confuse the two, and most of us obey it without question, wondering why happiness always seems one step behind. Pain also grows when compared across time. A small criticism at work can feel like an epic failure when your mind recalls every other criticism ever received. A lost relationship can feel catastrophic because your mind drags out old heartbreaks to support the story that love is dangerous. I knew a man who struggled to trust his team at a new job because he carried memories of a boss who had humiliated him years ago. The current team had done nothing wrong, yet every interaction was shadowed by the past. Emotional pain is rarely proportional to the present moment. It is amplified by the echoes of old wounds the mind insists on playing like a broken record. The mind is a filmmaker that loves drama, and it is relentless in editing life into a tragic narrative. A couple may argue briefly about finances, but the mind rewinds every fight, every harsh word, every small neglect from the past, creating a montage that feels endless. A minor failure can be spun into a lifelong story of inadequacy, a temporary loss into a permanent tragedy. I remember a young woman who had missed one promotion, yet she relived every misstep of her career for months, until she felt stuck in a story where success was impossible. The pain was not coming from life, it was coming from the cinematic reconstruction her mind insisted on showing every day. Healing begins when we notice the difference between the past and the present, between the memory and the moment. I once met a man whose family had abandoned him when he was a teenager. Every time he thought about them, he relived the loneliness and fear as if it were happening now. A mentor helped him distinguish the original event from the ongoing mental replay. He began to see that the emotional storm existed in his mind, not outside it. By refusing to relive the past, he discovered a space where life was unfolding anew, where he could make choices without the weight of old suffering pressing down on every decision. Even joy key and be trapped by replay just as easily as pain. Sometimes the mind replays losses not only as sorrow but as lessons that never seem to end. A musician I knew would rehearse the moment he was criticized in a concert, imagining it over and over until the joy of performing was consumed by fear and self-doubt. Emotional pain repeats when the mind refuses to separate the past from the present, and yet the same mind has the capacity to release it. Recognizing that suffering is often a mental rehearsal, not an ongoing event, is the first step toward reclaiming life from the relentless echoes that insist on playing forever. The fifth key point is that the mind grows strong on what you feed it. Imagine planting a garden. You can scatter seeds of weeds and they will sprout into chaos and thorns that prick at every step. Or you can plant seeds of nourishing vegetables and flowers, tending them carefully, and they will grow into a landscape of color, abundance, and life. The mind is no different. Every thought you dwell on, every word you listen to, every story you tell yourself is like soil, water, and sunlight. If you feed it worry, anger, and comparison, it will grow tangled and wild, strangling your peace. If you feed it gratitude, curiosity, and courage, it will grow clear and strong, carrying you toward what is possible. Most people are unaware of what they feed their minds daily. A young man scrolls through social media first thing in the morning, watching everyone else's achievements, curated lives, and conflicts, and suddenly his mind feels small, anxious, and restless. He believes he is absorbing information, but he is absorbing judgments and distortions. A few minutes of selective content repeated day after day reshapes his perception of reality. On the other hand, another person spends the morning reading something that challenges, inspires, or educates them. Both start their day with the same hours, the same coffee, the same commute, yet the mind of the second person grows stronger, steadier, and more capable of facing life. We feed our minds unconsciously in conversations as well. A friend who complains constantly, who points out only flaws, who dwells on what's missing in life, is like offering toxic food to the mind. Listening repeatedly, the mind begins to echo that same narrative. There is never enough, life is never fair, you are never ready. I remember a woman who noticed her moods always sank after visiting certain friends. When she became conscious of what she was feeding her mind, she chose to limit exposure and instead surrounded herself with voices of possibility, curiosity, and constructive challenge. The change was subtle at first, but over months, her mind grew lighter, more disciplined, more alert to what truly mattered. What we feed the mind is not only external but internal. Our self-talk, the stories we replay, the assumptions we carry about our worth, ability, or future are all like daily meals. A man I knew would begin every day whispering, "I can't do this, I will fail, I'm not enough." And by mid-morning he was exhausted, anxious, and paralyzed. He had been feeding his mind poison while believing it was truth. When he began the practice of consciously offering affirmations, realistic reminders of progress, and acknowledgement of past small wins, he noticed a shift. Tasks that once seemed impossible became manageable, conversations less intimidating, mornings less heavy. The mind is sensitive to these choices, responding to what it receives like a body responds to nutrition. The mind also grows through repetition of habits. A student who practices patience, focus, and discipline trains the mind in the same way an athlete trains their body. A young teacher who starts her day with reflection and journaling strengthens her attention, emotional control, and clarity, while another teacher who begins the day distracted by gossip, comparison, and negative expectations weakens her mind, leaving it brittle and reactive. Strengthening the mind is rarely dramatic. It is the accumulation of small, consistent inputs over time. Just as a single drop of water can wear away stone, consistent feeding shapes the mind quietly but irreversibly. It is remarkable how quickly the mind absorbs narratives, whether they are empowering or destructive. I recall a man who had grown up hearing, "You will never amount to much," repeated by teachers, family, and peers. Those words, though external, became internalized, shaping his decisions, his fears, his ambitions. Yet when a mentor began to feed him a different narrative, highlighting his strengths, pointing out successes, asking questions that provoked confidence, his mind slowly shifted. Within a few years, the man transformed from someone who avoided challenges into someone who sought them, all because the soil of his mind had been replanted, nourished by deliberate, intentional inputs. Finally, what we feed the mind determines resilience. Life will throw obstacles, setbacks, and disappointments, but a mind that has been carefully fed learns to respond rather than react. It recognizes difficulty without becoming paralyzed, absorbs critique without collapsing, moves forward without constant second-guessing. I met a young mother who faced financial stress, personal conflict, and exhaustion, yet she thrived because her daily habit was feeding her mind with stories of problem-solving, gratitude, and perspective. Her mind had been nurtured like a tree with deep roots, so that even the strongest winds of life could not uproot it. Feeding the mind is not optional, it is the foundation of every inner strength you will ever need. The sixth key point is that you don't need a new life, you need a new lens. Imagine walking through a forest wearing glasses that tint everything gray. The trees, the birds, the sunlight, the flowers, they all exist, yet your perception filters them into dullness. One day, someone hands you a new pair of glasses, one that lets colors shine. Suddenly, the same forest feels alive, vibrant, full of possibility. Life has not changed. You are in the same place, on the same path, with the same trees, only your lens has shifted, and with it, your experience transforms. Most people chase new circumstances, believing a new job, a new city, or a new relationship will fix them. But until the lens changes, life looks the same. I once met a man who hated his routine job. Every day, he left the house feeling trapped, bored, and frustrated. He believed the solution was a new position, a promotion, a bigger title. He switched roles, hoping the external change would solve the internal dissatisfaction. But months later, The sense of frustration returned. The job had changed, but his lens had not. He was still carrying the same assumptions, fears, and focus on lack. Only when he started noticing how he perceived the work, appreciating small wins and looking for moments of growth, did he feel a shift. Life didn't need to change. His view of life did. The lens you carry is built from stories, judgments, and assumptions collected over years. A teenager who grows up hearing, "You are not good enough," carries that tint into adulthood. A professional who constantly compares themselves to others walks through life with a lens that measures, criticizes, and diminishes. A single misstep can feel like failure, a small disagreement can feel like betrayal, and ordinary challenges can feel insurmountable. Changing your lens doesn't mean ignoring reality, it means noticing the patterns your mind imposes on reality, recognizing where interpretation has created unnecessary suffering, and choosing to see with clarity instead. Perspective is often overlooked because it is invisible. A young woman I knew believed her life was hard because she compared herself to friends who seemed to be ahead. She didn't change her job, her city, or her relationships. She simply began reflecting daily on her own progress, on the skills she was building, and the moments of joy she was overlooking. Slowly, the lens shifted. Her life had not changed. Her salary was the same, her commute was the same, but everything looked different. Tasks felt manageable, friendships felt richer, and challenges felt like opportunities rather than obstacles. The lens, not life, had rewritten her experience. This lens can either magnify problems or reveal possibility. A father who constantly focuses on what his children fail to do will feel stress, frustration, and exhaustion. Another father, observing the same behaviors but noticing effort, curiosity, and small achievements, experiences encouragement, hope, and connection. Life offers the same set of facts to both men. The difference is not external, it is internal. How we choose to filter experiences determines whether we feel trapped in chaos or moving through challenges with resilience. Changing the lens requires courage because it asks you to confront long-held beliefs. A young man, convinced he is unlucky in love, refuses to trust because he believes every relationship will fail. The events of the past, neutral by themselves, have been colored by assumptions, fears, and interpretations. When he begins to question the lens, asking, "Is this really inevitable? Or am I seeing only what confirms my old story?" he opens a space for possibility. He does not need a new partner to feel hope. He needs a new way of looking at relationships, a lens that allows him to see effort, kindness, and potential where before he only saw betrayal. Even small shifts in lens create profound changes in life's texture. I once met a teacher who dreaded classroom mornings, seeing every student's misbehavior as a personal failure. She began consciously choosing to notice curiosity, creativity, and moments of engagement instead. The school day was unchanged, the students, the lessons, the schedules, but her experience transformed. The lens made ordinary moments feel meaningful, mundane interactions feel full, and challenges feel manageable. Life did not have to move mountains. The lens simply had to reveal what was already there. The world becomes different not when it changes, but when we learn to see it differently. The seventh key point is that mastering the mind is the gateway to mastering life. Imagine a sailor navigating a stormy sea. The waves crash, the wind shrieks, and the sky darkens, yet the sailor remains calm because he knows how to steer, how to adjust the sails, how to read the currents. Life throws storms at everyone, yet most people panic, letting the wind of circumstance push them in every direction. The difference between being tossed helplessly and moving with purpose lies entirely in the sailor's control over the vessel. That vessel is the mind, and when it is steady, clear, and disciplined, even the fiercest storms cannot break you. I once met a young man who had grown up in a chaotic household, surrounded by shouting, instability, and unpredictability. By most accounts, his life w as difficult, and yet he thrived. Why? Because he had learned to train his mind to notice when fear or anger rose, and to choose his response rather than being controlled by impulse. He faced the same world with the same pressures and challenges as everyone else in his neighborhood, but his inner clarity gave him a freedom that others envied. He discovered that life does not have to change for peace to exist. The mind simply has to be strong enough to navigate the unchangeable. The mind shapes every choice we make. A student overwhelmed by exams will either spiral into anxiety or approach the work strategically, depending on the inner narrative guiding her. A parent facing financial strain will either panic, paralyzed by imagined disaster, or calmly plan, problem solve, and act. In each case, the external reality is the same. The pressures, deadlines, and stakes do not vanish, but the outcome differs entirely based on the mental framework. Life is reactive, but the mind is proactive. When you master it, you stop reacting and start choosing. Mastery of the mind also transforms how you perceive challenges. A man running a small business faced constant setbacks, clients cancelled, suppliers delayed, unexpected expenses appeared. Initially, each incident felt catastrophic, a signal that failure was inevitable. But over time, he trained himself to see setbacks as feedback, not judgment. The same events occurred, the delays, the cancellations, the unexpected costs, but his perception shifted, and suddenly the chaos became manageable. He discovered that external difficulties are neutral. It is the mind that labels them as crises or opportunities. Mastering the mind turns chaos into clarity. Even relationships are influenced by the mind's state. A person with an unsettled, reactive mind sees slight criticism as betrayal, silence as rejection, disagreement as abandonment. Another person with a mind trained in observation, reflection, and emotional control can navigate the same words, silences, and conflicts with understanding, patience, and constructive action. Life's external interactions do not change. The conversations, the tone, the gestures are identical, but mastery of the mind allows one to engage without losing balance. The power is internal, yet its impact radiates outward. The mind also determines resilience. A young woman recovering from a serious injury could have surrendered to despair, seeing her body as broken and her ambitions as over. Instead, she focused on small victories each day, movement regained, muscles strengthened, skills relearned. The physical challenges were real, but the mental mastery over discouragement, over doubt, and over frustration allowed her to persevere. Life presented obstacles. The mind determined whether she became trapped by them or empowered by them. Mastering the mind does not remove difficulty, but it magnifies endurance, creativity, and hope. Finally, mastering the mind redefines what it means to be strong. Strength is not measured by outward success, wealth, or status, nor by the absence of struggle. True strength is the ability to remain steady, to observe without being enslaved, to act with clarity when chaos surrounds you. I once met an older man who had lost everything in a sudden business collapse. His home, his savings, even his reputation were under threat, yet he faced each day with calm problem solving, clear priorities, and deliberate action. Life was as harsh as anyone could imagine, but his mind was disciplined. That discipline became his unshakable power. Master the mind and life follows, not because life has changed, but because you have. As you sit with these thoughts, notice how quietly everything begins to settle. Life itself has never been the enemy. The storms, the setbacks, the fears, they are not what define you. What shapes the world you walk through is the mind you carry, the lens you choose, the stories you allow to take root. The mind can build prisons or it can build wings. It can replay old pain or it can steady the heart in the present. The difference has always been in your hands, even when it felt invisible, even when it felt beyond reach. Every thought you feed, every fear you question, every old story you let go of adds clarity to your path. You begin to see that calm is not something life gives, it is something the mind allows. Strength is not the absence of difficulty, it is the quiet knowing that even in difficulty, your center does not shift. When you master this, the world no longer dictates your mood, your worth, or your direction. You move through it with steadiness, noticing what is real and letting go of what is not. The moments ahead will not always be easy, and yet you carry within you the ability to respond rather than react. Your mind, once restless and scattered, can become a compass, a shelter, a source of insight that guides your steps with balance and purpose. You will still face uncertainty, but it will feel different now because you know the difference between what belongs to life and what belongs to imagination. You will still feel pain, but it will no longer replay endlessly because you have learned how to witness it without surrendering to it. This is not about perfection or control, it is about presence, awareness, and trust in the quiet strength you have cultivated. Each thought observed, each fear questioned, each story rewritten builds a mind that is not easily shaken. A mind that can hold space for life as it is without needing to escape or fix it constantly. You are learning to stand firm while the world moves around you, to carry clarity and calm into every ordinary, extraordinary, and uncertain moment. So let the noise fade. Let the imagined storms pass. Let the old patterns dissolve, leaving only the truth of this. Life will offer what it offers, but the way you meet it comes from within. And that inner place, the mind that is disciplined, aware, and free, is where strength, peace, and possibility have always been waiting.